Good morning. I come from a black church, and I need call and response, so work with me. Good morning.
Good morning.
That's a little bit better. Thank you. For those of you who don't know what that experience is like, I highly recommend it to you. I want to thank the organizers of this conference for pushing this discussion. And I want to start out by saying I feel very connected to many of the things that you talked about in your speech, Tim. So thank you. I feel like this is an absolutely perfect continuing stream of thought from some of the stuff that you started. I'm going to start by saying two things. One, I think part of my job here is to challenge you, and I'm going to start right off. I need you all to turn around and look at each other for a second. Just turn and look at this room. Take a good look. The sister that spoke before me commented on the fact that this is a very young room, and I applaud that. But I want you to tell me what else is missing from this room.
It's a white room.
It's a what?
It's a white room.
So I think that's my first order of challenge to you. To make you uncomfortable about the fact that you could be comfortable sitting in a room that has youth diversity, age diversity, but not as much diversity in terms of people of color. So that's the first thing I want to say to you. The second thing I want to do is I want to begin with a principle that helps guide some of the way I engage in this work. And Dr. Desmond Tutu, who was the Archbishop of South Africa and one of the founding fathers, if you will, along with the founding mothers of the post-apartheid movement in South Africa. Dr. Tutu really embodied this tenet that I think is really important. And in a book that he put together of his thoughts and thinking, he opened it with a quote saying, "If I diminish you, I diminish myself." And he took that phrase and based it on Central African tenet and philosophy called Ubuntu. And the idea of Ubuntu is that there is a me in you and a you in me. And I think that is a very critical and guiding philosophy for all of us to take to heart when we look at this issue of the climate crisis. I think that the more we are able to see ourselves in each other and to recognize that the climate crisis that we are in, even when its effects may not be currently apparent to some, that we are all in a same critical boat. Some of us may be on the leading edge of that boat. Low-income communities, vulnerable communities, people of color communities, because of their existing challenges in some instances. Low-income communities in Appalachia, predominantly white, for example, are on the leading edge of some of these issues in terms of how the climate crisis is going to impact us. Despite that, however, I want to turn to, despite the fact that they are on the leading edge, many of these communities have exercised foresight. Some of them are organizing and winning, and that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. The idea of foresight I have been reading a lot about lately comes in some ways best to me through the writings of Robert Greenleaf in his essay called Servant Leader, or The Servant as Leader. And one of the things that Greenleaf recognizes in the essay is that foresight is not about like being able to forecast what the weather is going to be tomorrow. That's not what we're talking about when we say we need to act with foresight in the face of the climate crisis. Foresight, on the other hand, is more like recognizing that the acts that we take today can have a very significant impact on our future and still recognize that we have freedom to act in the present to change the course of our future. Our Congress has not acted with foresight. Communities on the ground, many of them on the leading edge of climate change, have acted with foresight. Some of those communities have never, ever been engaged in some of the beltway politics that got us Lieberman-Warner, that failed, that got us Waxman-Markey, that failed, that got us all of these bills that failed. Some of those communities have never been engaged with the larger, broader, mainstream environmental movement that has invested millions of dollars in terms of not only their lobbying efforts, but their research efforts, a lot of brain power in terms of crafting policies that never were people-centered. And all have, to this point, failed. But organizing for a powerful climate justice, many of us in the EJ movement, in the climate justice movement, have recognized that community-led solutions are winning. When we look at the broader landscape of activism, we recognize that despite failure in DC and around the policy campaigns, that grassroots climate justice campaigns across the United States have actually won. We've stopped coal in places like the Navajo Nation, led by the Diné, and the Hopi. The grassroots youth movement has forced the cancellation of life of mine permits on the Black Mesa in Arizona. We've actually worked, some of our colleagues have worked on the world's largest coal companies and forced them, like Peabody, to actually stop their activities in their community. Elsewhere, in U.S. community groups based in Appalachia, youth have galvanized around climate in their campaigns to stop mountaintop removal, coal mining, and similar groups in the Powder River Basin have united with farmers and ranchers against the expansion of the world's largest coal deposits. We've stopped the building of coal power plants. Nearly 2/3 of the 151 new coal power plant proposals from the Bush Energy Plan have been canceled. And that's been due to local organizing on the ground in communities. A recent example of this success is the campaign of the Diné grassroots and local citizens groups in the Birmingham area of Eastern Navajo Nation. For those of you not familiar with where the Navajo Nation is, part of it is in New Mexico. And they prevented the creation of the Desert Rock coal plant, which would have been the third such polluting monolith in that small rural community. Community-based networks along with indigenous people have really mattered in the call for climate justice. We've prevented the proliferation of incinerators. We've defeated big oil in our own backyards. In places like Richmond, California, we've stopped the expansion of Chevron plants led by APEN, Asian Pacific Environmental Justice Network, and ACE and others, not ACE, CBE and others have been engaged in those particular fights. These are fights to stop high carbon intensive crude oil expansions from taking tar sands in things like dirty tar sands in Canada. And what that victory demonstrated for many of us in the environmental justice movement is that our moral certitude about what we are engaged in, our community-based organizing, is more powerful when set loose on these challenges than the mighty lobby forces that operate within Washington, D.C. Now, to be sure, I have to say to you, as Tim did, it's really important for us to recognize that we can't do this without policy change, and that our grassroots organizing work is about bringing a people-centered policy around the climate crisis, a people-centered set of solutions around the climate crisis. And that means that we have to take our voices into the halls and, yes, make it more challenging for the lawmakers to actually do the wrong thing. My grandmother used to say to me, two things. One thing that was triggered by Tim, which was that she said, I am never concerned, and this was her words, about the white person who doesn't like me. I am more concerned about the white person who doesn't like me and has the power to stop or create problems in my life. And the second thing she would say is the true act of real craziness is when you keep doing the same thing twice, 3 times, 4 times, and expecting the same result. We need to go about this business and recognize that we cannot conduct business as usual. We support a carbon tax, but we support a carbon tax with a clear call for a moratorium on fossil fuels. Because if we were to just put a carbon tax on and not call for the ending of fossil fuel usage, we would be deluding ourselves. We would be doing the same thing all over again and expecting a different result. My grandmother used to say that was the definition of madness. Good morning.